We are on Chaf Beis Gimel Amud Aleph 23a. We're in the middle of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, as we explained, could be divided into a few sections. At the beginning of the Mishnah, the Gemara first concluded its commentary on the question of whether or not merit that a woman has can suspend her demise even if she's guilty. The different views, some that said yes, some that said no, some that said only for a certain amount of time, different opinions as to how long. Then the Mishnah went on to discuss the laws of what happens to a meal offering when it contracts impurity. And essentially we learn, comes in contact with impurity and thus becomes invalid. And we learned the distinction between Kedushas Damim versus Kedushas Haguf. The difference between something that has been consecrated to the temple, but only its value is consecrated to the temple. That is to say, once a person pledges to bring this meal offering or becomes required to bring the meal offering, at that point, the person is only obligated in the value of the meal offering. And therefore, if the actual flour comes in contact with impurity, not a problem. Just exchange it and bring another one. Pidyon, redemption, as the Mishnah refers to it as. If, however, the meal offering has been placed into the vessels that belong to the temple, and now the very body, the very substance of the offering, the meal offering in this case, has become consecrated to the temple, thus it cannot be simply exchanged if it's invalid. If it becomes invalid as a result of impurity, at that point, or after that point, then it's to be burned in the special fire that was there designated for any offering that's been invalid. Now, having discussed the issue of offerings that are invalid, the Gemara then gets to other ways in which the Sotah meal offering could become invalid. And they all revolved around the fact that either the husband or the wife decided, I'm not drinking anymore. And she decides, or he decides, they don't want to go through with it. Either because she admits the guilt, or because she just says, I'm not interested, or because he says, I'm not interested anymore, or because before they arrived in the temple, we discover that husband and wife were intimate. So even if, as Rashi tells us, even if the meal offering process began, that is, the fistful was taken and offered on the altar, the rest of the offering is meant to be eaten by the Kohen. Nonetheless, because it's become invalid, the Sotah process has been stopped in its tracks. So the rest of the offering is burnt as opposed to being eaten. Now, having discussed this issue of the meal offering being eaten by the Kohen, the Mishnah then got into the laws of when it isn't eaten. So we explained a while back in one of the classes earlier, about the axis of the karbonos, right? The axis of how we understand karbonos. On the bottom axis, you have the level of offering, the kind of offering. Is it a meal offering? Is it a sin offering, a guilt offering, a peace offering, a burnt offering? Those are your four general categories. There's oil of the yodid, but that's all within chatas, but those are the four general categories. And then on the other axis, you have what type of substance it is. Is it an animal? What kind of animal? Is it a meal offering, flour? Is it oil? Is it wine? And so on. And then, depending on where the offering falls on the axis, that will determine the halacha. So ordinarily, the meal offering on this axis, because it's a chatas, in the case of the Sotah, as well as the nazir, it's a chatas, and therefore the Kohen will eat some part of that offering. There's an exception to this rule, and that is when the Kohen himself is offering this meal offering. For whatever reason, whether the Kohen is bringing the meal offering as is required when a Kohen is installed as a Kohen, he first brings a meal offering. Whether we're talking about the high priest who brings a daily meal offering, whether it's a priest who became a Sotah, or the wife of a priest who became a Sotah, the wife of a Kohen who became a Sotah, or whether we're talking about a Kohen, at least the way Rashi tells us, even though Tosfos discusses that But if a Kohen decides to dedicate voluntarily a nadava, to voluntarily bring a meal offerings are completely fully burnt. Not burnt in the place of the invalid karbanos as we discussed earlier, but burnt on the altar as an oil as a burnt offering. This is the way Hashem decided this, and the Torah makes this exception, that even though meal offerings are usually partially burnt on the altar, the fistful is burnt on the altar. I'm sorry, the fistful is burnt on the offering, whereas the rest of the meal offering is eaten by the kohen or by the owner, depending on where the axis it is. But when it comes to a kohen, if the kohen is the one bringing the meal offering, then the entirety of it is burnt. The entirety of it is burnt on the altar as a burnt offering. This is the halacha we learned most recently. Now, from there we discussed the laws about a woman who's married to a kohen. And the basic halacha is, actually, Rabbi Gimple emailed me some pointers from Rambam's Book of Law, which I'm going to, I haven't looked at it properly yet, so I'm not going to comment, but perhaps I'll add it to the comments on the previous video, so you can go back and have a look at the comments. You can read the note. But the bottom line from our Mishnah is that because the husband, the kohen, owns some portion of the offering of his wife, so even if his wife is an Israelite woman, her father is an Israelite, she's not a kohen herself, she's not a kohenes, her husband is a kohen, so her meal offering is also burnt on the altar entirely because her husband, the kohen, owns some part of it. This two Tosfos discusses. And that's the bottom line that we learned so far. Okay. So having now discussed the difference between, now the same thing is true in the reverse. If a kohenes, a girl, a woman born to parents who are kohenim, her father's a kohen, but now she's married to an Israelite, a non-kohen Jew, so her meal offering is eaten. She no longer has a status that she had when she was living in her father's house, and her offering is burnt.
Is that because her husband has a share in the part of the offering?
Share in the offering. But we learned even more that even after she divorces her Israelite husband, or even if she's widowed from her Israelite husband, her offerings are still eaten and not burnt. That's what Rashi told us. That was the chiddush. That even though she's no longer married to this husband, but she no longer has a status of what she might have had earlier when she was living in her father's house. And her offerings are treated like an ordinary Israelite offering, and that part of the meal offering is eaten rather than being completely burnt on the altar as a burnt offering. This is where we are in the Mishnah. And that takes us to the line is Nachelas. The second, there's two lines in a row which say Nachelas in the Mishnah, on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph 23a. And then the second line that says Nachelas, the last word is Kohenes. You have it there? Okay. So the Gemara now continues, the Mishnah continues, with the difference between a female Kohen and a male Kohen. Right. The distinction we made till now is that the female Kohen, her status changes when she marries an Israelite, whereas a male Kohen remains a Kohen even if he marries an Israelite girl. So further differences between a male Kohen and a female Kohen. Kohenes, a Kohenet, a female Kohen. It's strange to say the language female Kohen because Kohen and female is Kohenes. So it'd be female Kohenes, which is a double expression because Kohenes itself means female. But the point is a female. Okay, Kohenes, a Kohenet, we'll just stick with that. A Kohenes, Mischal Leles. Mischaleles literally translates as becomes void. That's the word chalal. The root word there is chalal, means void, meaning it's a term used in halacha to describe something that's been stripped of its status. So sometimes it's used for karbanos also. You're machalal this on that, meaning you strip the status of this animal and you transfer the status it has onto a different animal. So that's what the word mischaleles means. She becomes stripped. That is to say, she becomes stripped of her status of a kohen if she has a forbidden relation. So if she at some point is eating truma, as a Kohen does, yeah, she's eating truma, and then she engages in a relationship that's forbidden to her. Considering that relationship, she loses her status. She's stripped of her status as a Kohen. But Kohen, a male Kohen, who has a relationship that's forbidden to him, he marries a woman he's not supposed to. Even if it's not illicit, he married her, but he's forbidden to marry her, say a divorced woman. Eina mischalal, he's not stripped of his status of Kohen. His children are. The children he would have from this woman no longer are Kohanim. They no longer have the status of Kohanim, but he himself doesn't lose that status. He can continue to eat truma every day. Further differences between the male and the female. Kohenes, a kohenet, the female. Metamel mesim, she is allowed to come in contact with a dead body and in this way contract impurity. She's allowed to. But the ain't kohen metamel mesim. But a kohen may not come in contact with a dead body. He may not go to a funeral, may not go to a cemetery, unless of course it's immediate family, in which case he's obligated to go. So that's difference number two. So number one is kohenes with a forbidden relation gets stripped of her status. A kohen does not lose his status, even though he engaged in a forbidden relation. That's number one. Number two, the kohenet may come in contact with impurity, may come in contact with a dead body, whereas a kohen may not. A kohen oichel b'kachei kachim. A kohen can eat, quote, holy of holies. So just to explain what that is. So we described the axis of the karbonos. Right, on the one side we have the substance of the offering, whether it's an animal, what kind of animal, or whether it's flour or wine. And then the other axis was what kind of carbon is it? Is it a guilt offering? Is it a burnt offering? Is it a sin offering? Is it a peace offering? Now, these the bottom axis, the type of carbon, is divided into two categories or three. One is the oila, the burnt offering. Okay, so that's not being discussed here because the oila, the burnt offering, is completely burnt on the altar and no part of it is eaten by anybody. But then of the karbonos, of the offerings in which part of it is eaten by humans, consumed by humans, there are those that are holy of holies and those that are kachim kalim, lighter holiness. That's the halachic term. And the difference is whether the offering is eaten by the owners and the kohen, like a peace offering, or is it eaten only by the kohen, like a sin offering or a guilt offering. So the one that's eaten by the kohen only, not by the owners, is called kachei kachim, higher holy status of carbon. Just in general, the word kadosh, holy in Hebrew, in halacha, just means the best translation is probably sacred, not even holy. Holy has a kind of mystical meaning, but when you're talking in halacha, it's not so mystical so much as it is practical. And the practical translation would be sacred, in the sense that it's more removed. The more removed something is, the more, quote, kadosh it is. So Shabbos is kadosh, it's removed because we are forewarned against many activities. Yom Kippur, in which you are forewarned against even more activities, right? All the things that are forbidden on Shabbos are forbidden on Yom Kippur, plus you can't eat. So it's Kodesh HaKadoshim, or it's Shabbos Shabbosayim, holy of holies, it's Shabbos of Shabbos. Whereas Yom Tif, in which certain things that are forbidden on Shabbos are permissible on Yom Tif, like cooking food that you need to eat, for example, is forbidden on Shabbos but permissible on Yom Tif. So Yom Tif is called Mikra Kodesh. It's one level lower of Kodesh because it's less removed from the rest of the week. So the more something removed, the more removed something is, the more restrictions there are on what can and can't be done with it, the more kadosh it is in halacha. So an offering belongs to the temple, it's kadosh, and you can't just eat it willy-nilly. Right? It's got to be eaten in purity. It has to be offered in a certain time and place in the temple, in a certain structure, and so on. So the less people, the more restrictions there are on who can eat of this carbon, the more, quote, kadosh it is. So there's one type of carbon, this peace offering, in which one portion is burnt on the temple, on the altar, one portion is eaten by the Kohen, and one portion is eaten by the owner. On the other extreme, you have the oila, the burnt offering, in which no one can eat it except for Hashem on the altar. Only God eats this offering. It's completely burnt. The Kohen doesn't eat. And then you have the middle, in which it's more kadosh than the peace offering, considering that the owner does not eat of that offering. Only the Kohen does. So this is kache kachim. This is the holy within the holy, the kadosh within the kadosh. Because it's an offering, it's kadosh. And then even within that, it's even more kadosh, because even the owner doesn't get to partake of it, only the Kohen does. So in this case, says the Mishnah, when there is a carbon that only the Kohen eats, not the owner, then only the male Kohen eats it. The pasuk specifically states, called Zachar, the male Kohen. But the ein kohenes echeles b'kache kachim. But the female Kohen may not eat it. When it comes to the peace offering, which the owners eat some portion of it, then the part of it that the Kohen eats, the Kohen can distribute it to his household, even to the female members of his household. But when it comes to the offerings that the owners do not eat, the sin offerings, the guilt offering, the kache kachim, the kodesh of the kodesh, in which only the Kohen may eat, the owners may not. And in that circumstance, only the male Kohen can eat, not the female Kohen. Okay, we'll stop over here, because now the Gemara is going to get into some more laws and the differences between men and women as they are treated with respect to certain rituals, the Nazir ritual, that's the Metzora ritual, marriage, capital punishment, and there are many different details that come up. So we'll stop over here and we'll try to give each of these halachas their proper due, so we can understand the context in which all these halachas are being told to us. So more on that, God willing, coming tomorrow. A wonderful
Shkoch, Rabbi.
Shkoch,
Good
thank
day,
you.
everyone. Have a blessed day. Shavua Tov. God bless you all. Thank you.
You too, Judge. Good day. Good day.